Thank you, John. Amanda Rigali, National Director of Combined Arts and Touring from the Arts Council, and I are going to do a bit of a double act this morning, and we agreed that Amanda would give the national overview of our support for rural touring, and that I would talk from a more local perspective about how across the north of England we really value rural touring, what we value it for, and how we see it contributing to our broader role to support the arts and audiences. And I should say, as John says, I'm director in the Northwest, but along with other parts of the Arts Council, we're now working in an area structure. So I'm very lucky actually to be talking about the whole of the North, which, being northern, of course, I would say is the best of the areas. The stereotypical view of the North, urban, gritty, post-industrial, certainly has its basis in fact. The Northwest is the most densely populated region outside London, and more than half of our largest cities are in the north. You can drive from one side of the country to the other on the M62 and barely lose sight of urban development. But there is the other north, where most of the North's people live in cities. Most of our land is rural, around 60% of our land. Northumberland, Cumbria, North Yorkshire are the three least densely populated counties in England. And my old stomping ground, Eden, in the east of Cumbria, is the most empty district council in the country, whereas the national average is 400 people per square kilometre. In Eden, you'll find only 24. If you live in West Cumbria, North Northumberland, or the North Pennines, you can be very isolated. So the availability and the quality of arts in rural areas is really important to us in the north of England. And our support for rural and community touring sits within a wider context, which encompasses cutting-edge international visual art at Grisdale Forest, arts development agencies like Rural Arts North Yorkshire, a theatre in a cattle auction mart in Skipton, which is one of my favourites, and I'm looking forward to visiting that, and increasingly collaborations which take the arts to unexpected places, such as the Lakes Alive programme of outdoor art and festivals across Cumbria. These are diverse activities, but what they have in common is that they grow out of a relationship with a locality, with a particular place, with a particular community. We've just been through a testing period. The first time the Arts Council has operated an open application and competitive process to decide how to distribute our revenue funding. And of course, as the Minister has alluded to, we're doing that with significantly less money in England. There have been some very difficult decisions, and we've not been able to support all the organisations that we would have chosen to. Overall, across the north, we've maintained and in some cases increased our support for the rural touring and community touring sector, although with some change in relation to schemes working more closely together and considering mergers. We also took the opportunity to consolidate our support for NRTF so that it's better equipped to support rural touring schemes to work together, in particular to support commissioning of work specifically for rural audiences. We want to enable the NRTF to develop their role in spreading awareness of good ideas, new ways of working, in providing opportunities for voluntary promoters to develop their knowledge and their skills, and to exercise more influence over the kind of work which is offered in their communities. To do the kinds of things that NRTF is planning to do this summer in taking voluntary promoters up to Edinburgh, to look at work, to meet companies, to set up a village hall in the city, and to have conversations with small-scale companies about the practicalities of rural touring and rural audiences. So what is it that across the Arts Council in the North we particularly value about the sector, and how do we see it contributing to the Arts Council's new 10-year strategy, Achieving Great Art for Everyone, which has goals to support talent in the arts, to increase opportunities for people to be inspired by and experience the arts, to encourage resilient and innovative organisations, to nurture leadership and to make sure that there's a really great offer for children and young people. The simple, straightforward answer is that rural and community touring allows us to bring great art to people within their own communities. It reaches parts of our area that don't have that professional arts infrastructure, don't have arts companies or venues. And in that way, rural touring speaks very directly to our mission to enable everyone to access great art within their own locality. That's more than 200 promoting groups across our villages and market towns, putting on around 500 performances a year and reaching something over 31,000 people. And one of the things we value is that it's a very particular kind of access. Rural and community touring is unusual in that it gives power to the consumer, to local communities, to local promoters, to decide what culture will be offered in their locality. And that seems to me to be a real key to success. And it's something that I know many of you, through your schemes, are building on, involving voluntary promoters even more in choosing which companies will be offered out to tour. Just to pick out a few other angles on this, we know that this kind of touring circuit provides a really important source of work for artists. We know that many of those who are active in rural and community touring depend on it for more than 25% of their work, and that many small companies and freelance artists rely on the kind of infrastructure support they can get from touring schemes in order to be able to tour at all. There are some really good examples of mentoring schemes working with younger companies. And I suppose I'd pick out the long-standing mentoring scheme for rural touring companies that's run by Cheshire Rural Touring, working with Panda in the northwest, which has been going for more than 5 years now. In terms of reaching more people, well, it's what it says on the tin, but it's more than that. As you know, seeing work in a rural and community touring context is not the same as going into a theatre in a town or city. There's a different dynamic. It's a social occasion. People often see friends there, maybe brought along by people that they know in the community. They would go in the same way that they would go to support the local bonfire, the local fete. And what that also does is it means people are going into a space which belongs to the community. There's not that sense of stepping over the threshold into a territory which is owned by somebody else. I think all of those things help to draw audiences in. Although, as we know, it's a fallacy that people who go to rural and community touring events go because they don't have access to the arts elsewhere. Many of them do choose to travel to access the arts somewhere else. The final thing that I wanted to highlight in terms of value is around leadership. I think rural and community touring has got much to teach us about identifying, motivating and supporting people who are leaders in their communities. So many times I've seen the twice yearly show give people an appetite for much more, building their own theatre, setting up an arts centre, which is what happened in Pocklington in East Yorkshire, starting a festival, organising a community play. It allows people to develop those community leadership roles and skills. And I think we do well to consider whether this model of supporting local leaders could have a role in some of the North's more urban communities, which have the lowest levels of engagement with the arts of all. We're in difficult times, as we've heard, and a particular concern for the future is maintaining levels of local authority investment. I think actually that community and rural touring is possibly better placed than some in this regard, particularly if you can mobilise your audiences to lobby their local councillors about the importance of the work that you do. But I also see some really positive opportunities, many of which are part of this conference programme. And just to pick out three: the closer dialogue between schemes, promoters and companies to commission work which is specially tailored to a rural audience, We've seen, I think, yesterday and on some of the films today about the commission to Dodgy Clutch, working with artists from South Africa, which was commissioned by the Northern Consortium, and I think is a great example of bringing something new to an audience, but something made with them in mind. I wonder also whether the Arts Council's new strategic funds for touring, which Amanda's going to talk about, might offer the opportunity to represent work which rural schemes want to put on, but which is currently too technically demanding for their venues. I'm really interested in the work that is going on to promote beyond the village hall and to broaden what's available in terms of workshops and participatory activity. The kind of work we heard about last night with animation workshops for children in advance of a performance, and then the work being integrated and projected as part of that music event. And also moves to promote outdoor work at fetes and in the marketplace. We know there is a really strong audience interest and enthusiasm for that kind of activity. And finally, I see digital as being a real opportunity in an artistic sense, but also for online ticketing, and as a way to build on the conversation with the audience, which inevitably exists in a rural and community setting, through forms of social media like Facebook and Twitter. The Henley Centre for Forecasting, which spends most of its time telling supermarkets and big companies what consumers' behaviour is going to be like, did some work a few years ago on how that consumer behaviour might work in the arts. And what they said is, and this is about 3, 4, 5 years ago now, they said there's going to be a polarisation. People will get most of their culture through a screen, through a machine like an iPod. It will be global, it will be mass market, it will be commercial. And in contrast, there will grow a balancing interest in special experiences, authentic experiences, experiences shared with other people. And we see this in the growing interest in one-off events, in site-specific work, in festivals and cultural experiences outside the mainstream. Some years ago, the chief executive of a large rural council said to me that he couldn't understand why we were still supporting rural touring, because everybody's got a car now. That is to miss the point, as you well know. It's a different kind of cultural experience, one that many people enjoy alongside trips to a concert hall or a purpose-built theatre. That gives me an optimism about the future of rural and community touring. I think many, if not most people, living in rural areas enjoy feeling part of that community and having opportunities to take part alongside their neighbours. And rural and community touring offers an opportunity for a distinctive social and cultural experience within your own locality, even for those of us who get up in the morning and commute to work in our cars. Thank you.